an interview with Doug Drexler. This is episode 34.
You're listening to 70s Trek with Bob Turner and Kelly Casto, the fan podcast that looks at Star Trek in the 1970s. It was the decade that built a franchise.
Grab your Super 8 camera, put on your hip huggers with your platform shoes, and hey, don't forget that mood ring, because it's time to travel back to the 70s. I'm Bob Turner.
And I'm Kelly Casto. This week, we talk with Star Trek legend Doug Drexler. He worked on just about every incarnation of Star Trek from 1990 to 2005, and he won 2 Emmys for his work with Star Trek. He's also the person who designed the Enterprise NX-01. He designed a Federation starship, actually 2.
That's so cool. But Doug is also a lifelong Trek fan, and he played a rather significant role in fandom during the era, and we plan to ask him all about that.
But before we hear that interview, let me remind you how you can reach us. Just go to our Facebook page. It's facebook.com/70strek. There you can listen to the past episodes and leave us a comment or a question. We love talking Trek.
We sure do. You can also send us an email to 70strek@gmail.com. And you can find the show on iTunes. Just search for 70s Trek in the podcast section. And if you like the show, please leave us a rating or a review. That makes it a little easier for other people to find the show. Doug Drexler has a Star Trek resume that is really deep. He began working as a makeup artist with The Next Generation during its 3rd season. And while working on TNG, and I love this, he earned 2 Emmy nominations. He also became the lead scenic artist and a production illustrator for Deep Space Nine, and also did some work, unofficially, for Voyager. Doug then went on to serve as the senior production illustrator on Enterprise. And you have the distinction of being the person.
I was on Voyager in an official capacity on visual effects.
Well, and that's something I kind of want to ask you about as we get going. So that's because you were working for a different company, not Paramount, right?
Well, the visual effects were being done at Foundation Imaging at the time. And when Deep Space Nine went down, I knew all the guys at Foundation Imaging, and I was just getting started in CG. Hey, I didn't say hi to everybody. Hey, everybody, thanks for tuning in to hear whatever the heck I'm going to say. But I was at Foundation Imaging for 2 years for Voyager, and at that point they had visual effects supervisors on the show like Dan Curry and Gary Hutzel. During the days of physical models, those guys used to actually shoot the models and light them and composite them. But then when CG came in, there were vendors like Foundation Imaging and Zoic, 2 CG houses. And a supervisor would vendor out work to a place like Foundation. And then, say, for instance, Gary Hutzel, instead of him shooting the models like he used to, he would have to go to the CG house and explain what he wanted, and then he'd come back in a few days, and if he was lucky, it was basically what he was hoping for. But anyway, yeah, so I was up there, but then I returned to Enterprise, and that was quite a great time for me. I loved working on the show because it was a big family for the TV series stuff, starting with TNG all the way through Enterprise, where you had a family of people who had been together almost 20 years working on a show, that's really ideal to have that kind of situation. Movies tend to be nomadic, where you go from one job to the next and you may never see that person again,
And even in TV, that's rare, isn't it, to have a family of people working behind the scenes like that?
It is rare. I've been very lucky. I've been connected with several families like that. Maybe one, two. I've had that. I've been fortunate enough to be in that situation, I think, 4 times in 35 years.
That's neat.
That's awesome.
Let's talk about Enterprise since we've already gone there. You designed Enterprise NX-01. Can you tell us about that? What was that like?
Well, I mean,
you're walking in Matt Jeffries' footsteps to a degree.
That's absolutely true. And I don't think there's ever been a ship designed for the show that has more of Matt Jeffries in it than that one. And it was probably the most thought out of all of the ships, right down to the airlock doors on the outside, which, we don't know what they look like in most of the other ships. You can't even get that close. On a CG model, we could build it out to the screw heads if we want to. You could just keep getting closer and closer to it. It was the first. It's probably one of the first times that a CG program was used in an art department to help design something like that. I'm sure that someone may have done it in motion pictures, but it was pretty early on in those days. And basically, Herman Zimmerman asked me to join the art department from Foundation Imaging and bring the computer know-how with me, basically. And it was Mike Okuda, I think, who recommended it to him, that we would build the ship in the art department and be able to for the first time, be able to actually do flybys of the camera, have the light moving across it. And, that before you did a bunch of drawings, and the drawings would go to the model shop and they would build the model, and you would go see the model being built over a period of weeks. And maybe it will look like what you were hoping it would look like. You don't know. If it does, that's great. The thing about the computer is that on the day you're sitting there, you have an idea what it's going to look like, how it's going to move, what the dynamic of it is as it goes by the camera. If you draw it as sketches and they build a model, it could be months before you see anything like that. So it's such an advantage. And so the NX was the first ship there never was a physical model of it. It was the first one that did not have a physical model. But honestly, yeah, and the child in all of us likes the toy, knowing that there's a model there, like I have a robot in my room.
Right.
Yes.
But the thing is that I got to tell the child to simmer down.
I'll bet working on an Enterprise, you probably had to tell the inner child that quite a bit.
Oh, heck yeah. Well, that's like the dream come true. And honestly, now you mentioned nominated for a couple of Emmys, but I actually won a couple of Emmys for Battlestar Galactica visual effects. And I have an Academy Award for Dick Tracy makeup. And I got to say that if in one hand I have the opportunity to design an Enterprise, and in the other hand I have the opportunity to get an Oscar at a certain point in my life, I'm not sure what I would do. I go, let me see, Oscar Enterprise. I don't know. Can I sleep on it? Yeah. So that's like a tremendous. It's almost unreal, honestly. I designed 2 Enterprises. As a matter of fact, I think that. Well, Andy Probert did the D, and he finished up the motion picture Enterprise, which they had started building. I think Matt Jeffries had done some original sketches for what it would look like, and then Andy basically took it over and really sweetened it up. So he comes close to having designed 2 of them. I guess we should say Andy Probert designed 2 of them. I got to design the NX and the J, which is an Enterprise from a far-flung future, and pretty proud of it, I gotta say.
The J is pretty incredible. What a design that is. You should be proud of that one too.
Well, thanks. It was too much for some people because when I designed it, I knew that when I saw the original Star Trek and I saw the Enterprise on the original show, what made it so magical was that you had these huge nacelles that kind of trailed behind it.
Right.
And that were mounted on pylons that weren't even on the middle of the nacelle. They were at the very front. So you had this long, I mean, here's the point where the pylon fastens to the nacelle and it goes way back. It just basically defied gravity. And actually what's really amazing is how well and true those nacelles really have stayed over the years. I think it was only in the last 5 or 6 years that the Smithsonian really noticed that the nacelles were sagging. They had a small tremor in DC, and it was after that they noticed it. But what I'm getting here is that I designed the J to look impossible. I knew that if people looked at that and didn't say, that's impossible, I knew I had failed. And so when someone tells me that those struts that hold the engines, they're absurd. It's like a soap bubble will get knocked off, you know. I mean,
that's what you were going
for.
for.
That's what I wanted. You could either be negative about it and say, oh, they didn't know what they were doing when they designed it, or you could use your brain and say, wow, they're in command of technologies that are beyond what we know.
Bingo. Yeah, bingo.
You know?
That's when you look at that, that's exactly what you think. What was it, 500 years further on than Enterprise, like right?
It really, it turned out beautiful, and it really, Eagle Moss did a little model of it, and wow, I can't believe, when they said they were going to do it, I said, I don't know. I don't know how you're going to do that. It's so spindly. And they did. It's really incredible.
Do you have one?
I have one. Have you seen it?
I've seen it, and I'm waiting for mine. I don't have it yet, so I'm waiting for it.
Well, you know what? I didn't have it. If you're in the United States, you probably don't have it. They have it over in Europe and England for months now.
Yeah, they're ahead of us.
And what always happens is they never make sure I get one.
Oh.
And I have friends in England and Ireland who will actually buy one for me and ship it over. So that's why I have one.
Nice.
That's incredible.
That is
have your own ship.
Yeah, right.
Oh, yeah, I know. And I help them out all the time. I mean, I give them files, and when they need me, I'm there. But then as soon as they have what they want, then, I'm lucky if I hear from them again.
Doug who? What's your favorite memory from those years on Enterprise? Is it designing the NX-01 or?
Oh, well, yeah.
I mean, that's
sure.
a big deal.
Yeah, that's huge. I mean, it doesn't get much use. I mean, that's why I say Academy Award, Design an Enterprise. Academy Award, let me think about that. It really is like at the very tippy top of the heap for me, from 1966. I mean, I was watching, from the first year, I watched the whole first season in black and white.
Oh, gosh.
So, yeah, let's talk about that. What is your earliest Star Trek memory?
My earliest, well, of course, is the print ads in the newspapers and stuff. Back then, all 3 networks had a fall season where, like in September, right about the time you were going back to school, the consolation prize from ABC, NBC, CBS was a bunch of new shows. And I had seen print ads, usually with the artwork from the first James Blish book. That was a painting with the Enterprise swooping around
love
planetoid.
those. We love those.
Well, that painting was painted by the great American realist James Bama, who, if you remember all the old Doc Savage covers with the incredible,
yes,
shirt torn up.
Yeah,
that's the guy who did that painting.
Oh, I didn't know that. We were trying to figure out who did that number 1. We couldn't find that artist.
Bama, B-A-M-A, James
Awesome.
Bama. He's brilliant. I mean, if you type in James Bama, Google it, and go to images, you'll be blown away by the men's magazine art that he did in the 50s and 60s. Just like mind-blowing stuff. Incredible.
Neat.
But that was probably the first thing that I remember. When it first premiered, I have to confess, I wasn't allowed to watch television on a school night. And now I was a very well-read kid, and I had read all the science fiction classics, and there wasn't much out there, even in the movies. It was all kid stuff. And so I actually missed the first few episodes.
So you're a sci-fi fan already, and you weren't allowed to watch?
Oh, yeah.
Wow.
Well,
that's tough.
first of all, TVs, it wasn't good for you back then, like
Right.
it is now.
Right.
Yeah, sure. Exactly.
Evil television.
That's right.
Yeah.
I mean, comic books were the same way. I mean, now they're treated like art, and stuff that came out of the comics are huge money-making movies now. But, back then, about the same time as Star Trek, it was stuff that, only dummies
That's right.
read,
Right.
Now we know better. But, so I wasn't allowed to watch any television during the week. And I was hearing about it from my friends at school who were similar to me and had sophisticated tastes in science fiction. As a kid, I read Harlan Ellison and H.G. Wells and Isaac Asimov and stuff like that. So I was going crazy to get a peek at it.
Oh God, yeah.
And one night, my mother was taking a shower, and I snuck downstairs. I could hear the water running, so I knew I was safe. I snuck downstairs and turned on the TV, and I was able to watch about 15 minutes of an episode. And that was it. I basically went on strike for 1 hour a week during the week, which I did get. And the original Trek, I mean, it really, and I talked to Denise Okuda about it. She said the same thing, that after an episode was over, you'd sit there almost in a trance. You were so entranced by the story and the interesting things that they, were putting out there. I mean, people, unless you were there at the time, people don't remember how groundbreaking it really was. And I don't just mean in regard to doing, good science fiction stories on television, which is unusual. But say, for instance, the Bridge of the Enterprise was so unusual. People don't realize, I mean, in the 60s, there was still a lot of segregation. I mean, look, we still have problems today. In the 60s, it was even worse, And when you saw the bridge and there was a Japanese man flying the ship. Okay, it was only about 20 years before that we were in the midst of World War II.
Right.
Fighting the Japanese, That was pretty amazing right there. On every other show on television, Japanese were portrayed as enemies, even if it was comedies. McHale's Navy,
Right.
The Wackiest Ship in the Army, anything like that. The Japanese were villains. And now you had this show where there was a Japanese, he was a respected officer on the bridge of the Starship. Then you had Nichelle Nichols as Uhura, a black woman who commanded a lot of respect, intelligent, kept the tenuous waves of subspace channels open. I mean, that was very, very unique. Now, there were other examples back then as well. I mean, shows like Mission Impossible had Barney crawling through the pipes, their tech guy, and what was there were other shows. Star Trek is the one that mostly gets remembered for that, though. And then you had a Scotsman, and then you had a Russian in the second season. I mean, they were our enemies,
Right.
That's the thing that Star Trek is all about. It's not about xenophobia and being afraid of what's different. It's about embracing what's different and realizing it's that Roddenberry's, IDIC, the philosophy of IDIC, infinite diversity and infinite combinations. We are greater than the sum of our parts.
What episode at that time really resonated with you? What stuck with you?
Oh God! Well, I mean, there were so many good ones. Particularly, I think the most hardcore science fiction in the first season. But there was some incredible stuff in the second and even the third season. I mean, episodes that really left an impact on me, and there were a lot of them. But I mean, of course, everybody remembers fondly, City on Edge of Forever, with that Harlan Ellison wrote the original script on and was rewritten by Roddenberry, which led to a feud between those two guys. They didn't talk to each other for years. That's an incredible show. Joan Collins as Edith Keeler. There was one in the second season that was called, oh my God, hello. Metamorphosis.
Metamorphosis.
What a beautiful show. I mean, as a kid, I didn't realize all the subtlety of it. I'll watch it today, and now, after having lived a life, I get choked up watching it.
You do, don't you? You do.
Oh, yes.
I totally agree.
Well, so outside of watching the show, what was your first real act as a fan? What did you go to a convention? Did you buy memorabilia?
Well, the thing was that I was way before conventions.
Yes,
The first convention I don't think was till like 71 or 2 or something like that, which I was at. I went to. I was at the very first Star Trek convention. They only expected a couple hundred people. Like I think 2,000 showed up.
Yeah, tell us about that a little bit. Can you tell us about that 72 convention?
Well, it's just that no one had ever heard of such a thing before. I mean, I knew about comic book conventions, but just the idea of being around a lot of like-minded people who got it where everyone else seemed to not be getting it. They canceled the show. It was a revelation to everyone. And that was like the beginning of fanzines being done, which fanzines were the internet of the day.
Oh, yeah.
That's how fans communicated ideas to each other.
Right.
They mimeograph those things up. Mimeograph.
yeah.
Send them through the mail. It was much harder to do anything back then.
Yeah, exactly.
Sure was.
Everything's so much easier now. Of course, if you're only like 10 years old at this point, you think that going on a computer and Googling something's a lot of work at this point. I had to Google it. Oh my God, my finger hurts. But it used to be. And when I was working on the show, we didn't really have the internet till Enterprise. And so any research that I did, I had to leave the studio, go to a library, go to a bookstore,
Oh, gosh. Yeah, we've talked on this show about how incredible it is that this fandom came about in the 70s. It's, the dark ages of technology, really, in our lifetime. There's no internet, there's no social media to drive it forward. These are little pockets in little TV markets, but they all spring up and they all kind of catch fire, and it all sort of happens around the same time.
But yeah, it did reach a critical mass around 76, I think. Yeah, that makes sense. It really started to reach a critical mass where conventions were pulling in huge numbers. Huge
16,000, right?
Yeah, it was amazing. They still do pretty good. I mean, I go to Las Vegas every year as a guest, and it's a great time. Great time.
While we were talking with Doug, his phone rang and he was forced to take the call. But we wrapped up our interview with him just a few days later.
And we'll have part 2 of that conversation next week.
Thanks for listening to 70s Trek, an independent fan production. Join us next week as we explore more about the production, the actors, the producers, and the influencers of Star Trek in the lost decade of the 1970s on 70s Trek.